And finally this evening, the unicorn, a mythical beast according to most, a 3-star attraction according to Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey.
That elusive creature of fable and legend, the sensation of the ages, the living unicorn!
The real magic happened when we took them out into the world and the way people responded to them. They touched people.
Do you believe in unicorns?
Yes.
Why?
Because I just saw one. I never thought that it was real. I always thought it was a myth.
We became part of a myth, and sometimes you think you're doing the magic, and sometimes you realize the magic is doing you, and this was one of those moments.
I believe in the unicorn. I believe in the unicorn. I believe.
Which was blighted considerably by a tragic event that happened. A terrible story hit the paper, and that was the worst mass murderer of the 20th century, Leonard Lake. He had been our neighbor when we lived on the ranch. He was a great homesteader, and we learned a lot from him about livestock and keeping care of animals. When we went to do the Renaissance Fair, we brought him along to do photography, because he was a photographer. He would go around to schools and take school pictures and stuff. They took him in on a shoplifting charge, and he immediately committed suicide.
The local coroner says 5 bodies have been found here so far. The Calaveras County Sheriff once told me, though, he believes there are as many as 20 victims, though, buried on the property.
The papers went to his wife and asked if she had any pictures of him that they could put in the paper. And the picture that she gave them was a picture of him with the unicorn. And so the unicorn became associated with this horrific mass murderer because he got called the Unicorn Man. People obviously made that confusion between me and Leonard. To be confused with mass murderers is a pretty awful thing to happen. So there was this contamination of the whole thing that really was terrible and tragic and devastating to us and all, and to the magic. Now that's been decades ago, and I think the world has forgotten all that stuff.
How do you want this to go?
Yeah, I would love if you just do most of the talking and just share your whole new perception of this case, the Leonard Lake case, and the new revelations in those emails. Because you are far better speaking with English, so I will say some things, insert some things, but probably, yeah.
Yeah, it's I found it kind of difficult in researching this case. Like, there's a lot of things that are either, you know, have the same timeline, but different things happen, or like Leonard Lake's military history, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Is because there are Associated Press articles that come out pretty close to the murder date, like local newspapers in the California area, that state that he's an aviation technician. And then the overwhelming sense that people get from the other information out there is that he's a radar technician, like Lee Harvey Oswald, a radar operator. Am I correct?
Totally correct, yes.
Yeah, and that discrepancy to me, in journalism, there's a form when you're discharged from the Army, a DD-214 form, that should clearly have laid that out to any journalists that were interested in the case. So it was different events like that that started to make me doubt even the source material that I was even reading. So it became, that's a little disclaimer to all this, is Leonard Lake's life is very difficult to research.
Well, there is some information available also in documentaries, so we know some insights about the early childhood of Leonard Lake. But what do you think about the psychotic state that he was in, and schizophrenia in the Army? What do you make of that then, when he was an aviation technician?
I find myself at odds with what is reported generally, because it says he's a non-combatant. He's in Da Nang, for what we know, he's there in 1965. And Da Nang is like a hot zone, and he's getting mortar around. It's getting hit by mortar shells at the time he's there. So I don't really see him as in a non-combatant role. When you get hit by a bomb in the military, you're a combatant. And then the second deployment he supposedly volunteers for. But I don't see the information there. But he supposedly, that's when he gets sent home early. And he volunteers in 1970, from most sources I can read, for his schizophrenia. And he either spends the next 2 years in a military hospital or the next 1 year, according to most sources.
Okay.
But like everything else, that's particularly dubious that they can't keep track of where this man was and what he did in the military when it's all clearly stated in a discharge paper. Right, and the military also doesn't want to comment further when they're asked by certain news sources about his schizophrenic states or anything like that. There's a specific mention in the Associated Press that he doesn't want that the military doesn't want to further comment on Leonard Lake's military history.
Interesting.
Right, and when I see conflicting facts like that and something that should be presented in one document alone, it kind of alludes to a cover-up of sorts, like everything else you see in McGowan's work. If there are too many different answers to something and still don't explain it.
Yeah.
But in my work, I was more interested in his life after the military, because I started realizing I can't figure out what this guy really did as a kid. You hear about how he goes back and forth with his mother and doesn't like her and likes living with the grandparents, and his brother gets hurt and he starts to despise his brother. That's all I can really get of Leonard Lake's childhood, besides that it takes place around Ukiah County. And that brings us to I mean, mind you, Leonard Lake is 39 when this all ends, the way it does. And that only takes place in the last 2 or 3 years of his life is when the killing takes place. So from the 70s, when he gets out of the Marines in 1971, he attends a community college. He's put in Camp Pendleton for a little while for a psychiatric evaluation. But from that point forward, I would call the Greenfield Ranch years. And the hippie commune, it's always sort of glazed over in every narrative I find, is that he lived on a hippie commune. And the proximity to the Manson case and the complexities of that case and the idea of witchcraft and the networks that it brought with it led me to believe that there was more there than what's normally being covered in the mainstream accounts and even the work of some prominent authors on this. What can be known is that he was at Greenfield Ranch from at least 1975 to 1981. And besides his time in the Marine Corps, I mean, that's his longest time of being in a stable home, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And through what I researched in this case, I would argue that the Greenfield Ranch fostered the important relationships that would develop Leonard Lake into the person he would become. It matches with many of the other things you see in McGowan's work. Is there was a large marijuana operation. A bunch of different hippie families bought into this land. It was parceled out. And from there developed some very nefarious relationships that were directly involved with Leonard Lake. Like Leonard Lake's neighbor on Greenfield Ranch was a man named Timothy Zell or Tim Gazelle or Otter Zell or Oberon Zell, Tim Gazelle. Those are all the same man, but he's the founder in 1962 of what's called the Church of All Worlds, which is sort of an idea that came out of Robert Heinlein's work, Stranger in a Strange Land. It was a place for all these New Age ideas and thoughts to come together and be practiced. And he brings the Church of All Worlds to Greenfield Ranch in 1973. So around the same time Leonard Lake appears there, Otter Zell and his Church of All Worlds are his neighbor.
And they were in a black magic cult. Yeah.
Right. It is described as Dan Lassiter in Die For Me as a black magic cult. It's described by most journalists as a pagan collective. Otter Zell is the man who coined the phrase Neo-Pagan. He's almost single-handedly responsible for that whole movement. So modern Wiccans and witches and a lot of them turn to Otter Zell and others at the time in the area's literature for their religious beliefs. And it's referred. I mean, I forwarded you some of my sources where it showed that Greenfield Ranch is a marijuana farm, and it's a notorious marijuana farm. It's renowned for how old it is, how long they've been doing it, and even Dan Lasser, the guy who wrote Die For Me, he came out in a Reddit forum. Someone posted a letter because they had asked him about similar connections, and he even seems to like obfuscate the idea that there was even a cult there. He says that it was a happy hippie commune. But most, even like in the Ukiah newspapers that look at the ranch in retrospect, like the Ukiah Daily Journal once said that Greenfield Ranch, at Greenfield Ranch, hard drugs and pot cultivation were at the low end of the criminal spectrum. And given the proximity to Manson's camp, and you know about the whole aspect of the Manson case, the Mendocino witches?
Yes, I'm sure do.
Right, the spiral staircase.
Yes.
This is all the same area. And these are the people, like you can see from some of the photos I provided you, that the spiral dance is a ritual that takes place at the Greenfield Ranch by witches. So these people are, those connections were dubious enough for me, but where I actually came into this case is I'm a huge fan of science fiction, and I realized that Marion Zimmer Bradley in America is one of the most best-selling fiction authors of all time. Well, she and her husband, Walter Breen, were best friends with Otter Zell and his wife, Morning Glory Ravenheart Zell. And so these are Leonard Lake's neighbors. Well, Marion Zimmer Bradley's husband, Walter Breen, in 1964, the science fiction community, fan community, tried to ban him from conventions there because he was accused of molesting like 10 boys in the community. And in the Berkeley area, where all these different people, kind of the intellectuals involved with this organization were a part of, that was kind of not seen as such a bad thing, and there was an actual debate in the literature of the science fiction fan community around 1964 about whether or not Walter Breen should be banned. So in order to quell down that debate, he marries Marion Zimmer Bradley. And that same year, he pens the quintessential pedophilia, like, writings, Greek Love. And the year after, 1965, Marion Zimmer Bradley pens Feminine Greek Love. So these are two works on pedophilia written by the good friends of Leonard Lake's neighbor. And I start to see these associations when you see in the California local paper reports about how there were 18 photo albums of little girls taken from Leonard Lake's home. I mean, that number even varies in some accounts, but that's a substantial amount of naked pictures.
It's a very good connection, and I can also recall that his neighbors also asked him to do photography on those festivals, right? In 1994, well, it's a very complicated relationship between him and Otter Zell, but it's 1981, which is the same year Leonard Lake is supposedly evicted from Greenfield Ranch, because there's two different stories to that. One is that his ammo shed, where he keeps all his guns and ammo, blows up. And the other one is that people just got sick of him for firing guns and they evicted him. He's asked in that year, 1981,
to go on tour with Zell with his unicorn, with the unicorn they created together. Which is, that to me was the most ridiculous part of this case, is that when I saw he was involved with the creation of unicorns, it almost doesn't seem real, you know what I mean?
Yeah, mythical symbolism.
Right. I mean, Zell actually patents the process. In 1984, when the unicorn Lancelot, he rents the unicorn out to the Ringling Bros circus and patents the unicorn horn surgery, even though it wasn't invented by him. It was invented by, I have the man's name. I sent you a picture of the cow the man made. Those in the 30s.
Yep.
Well, they started making them in the late 70s. Leonard Lake and his neighbor, Tim Zell. They would bring him to Renaissance fairs. That's how he actually meets Cricket Balazs. His second wife, in 1980, I believe it is, brings Lancelot to a Renaissance fair, and she loves the unicorn, and he uses it to pick her up, and the relationship takes off. I mean, that was his original intention. According to a few of the books written about the crimes, Leonard Lake's intention with the unicorn was to show it off to girls, and it was a way to get women to take pictures of women. It was like a real high point for him of taking pictures of women, actually. There's a lot of descriptions, in Die for Me especially, of him using the unicorn to attract young women.
Yeah, I also read that. That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, I was really surprised when you see the literature, the mainstream narrative, like the Wikipedia and all that about Leonard Lake. It doesn't mention anything about pedophilia, but there's a constant strain of it in his crimes. I mean, those are crimes that he's committing. If pedophilia is not legal at the time when he takes these pictures.
And also the amateur S&M videos later with Cricket and other young women.
Right. Those are referenced. There's a woman who ends up giving a testimony that he dates after he divorces his first wife, who he essentially starts pimping her out. I think she's one of the women who he sells to Charles Gunner at one point. And she is the first witness to mention, in the timeline of how things would be, to mention his interest in snuff porn.
Yeah, I also read that. Yeah.
She's one of countless witnesses. Now, the interesting thing about the Zell's friends, Marion Zimmer Bradley and Walter Breen, is that Walter Breen uses Greek love to basically establish the foundations of intellectual pedophilia and those kinds of ideals in America. It's a history of pedophilia throughout the ages, and he uses it to justify the behavior that he engages in. And as he's about to be banned from science fiction conventions, that's when he meets his wife, best-selling author, Marion Zimmer Bradley. And by her marrying him, she gets him out of being banned from those conventions, and he's allowed to go there forever. He's famous by his own accord because he's a numismatist, which is a coin collector, and he has penned some of the best-selling works on coin collecting in American history. And this is Zell's good friend. In 1966, after this wedding, they go on to found the Society of Creative Anachronism. And the founders of that are Marion Zimmer Bradley, Walter Breen, Zell, his wife, his wife isn't there at the time, and a few other people who are associated with Greenfield Ranch. There's a bard named Gwydion Penderin. It's very hard when these people change their names 5 different times to keep track of it all. But Zell was part of the founding of the Society for Creative Anachronism, which in Dave McGowan's work and a few of the other works I've seen reference that Leonard Lake was a part of. So Leonard Lake is in an organization founded by the man who wrote the fundamental text on pedophilia in America. His neighbor is best friends with that man.
Yeah.
So these connections started to become alarming to me, and when I researched this, I actually found that in the science fiction community, I believe it's in 2012, Marion Zimmer Bradley's daughter wrote an account of what took place there. It's called The Dark Side of Avalon. And she accounts being raped by a lot of the prominent pagans of the time. There's a man she mentions, Isaac Bonowitz, who's actually the officiator at Otter Zell's wedding on Greenfield Ranch, and also a part of the Church of Satan in Anton LaVey's Church of Satan in 1970. And Marion Zimmer Bradley's daughter has claimed in her book that she was raped by him, specifically. And so now you have allegations of rape to people who are directly at Greenfield Ranch.
It's getting bigger and bigger, yeah.
Right. Did you read, you read Die For Me?
Yes, I did. I own it.
Right. I had just read it this week to try to correspond with the work I did, and I was amazed at how much pedophilia was going on in Leonard Lake's life. I mean, the woman that lives across the street that he facilitates a relationship with, still well into when he's married to Cricket, he's writing this woman letters. And she's not even a woman. She's a 16-year-old girl. And I'm arguing through these connections that the Society for Really Creative Anachronism, which today is facing its own sex scandal, I believe they've had to settle a tremendous lawsuit and a number of tremendous lawsuits that are kind of making the members angry to be in there now, because there's a bunch of different rape cases from the 2010s. But the whole purpose of this, the Church of All Worlds, the Society for Creative Anachronism, these are the same subcultures where you see these people groomed. Like your Charles Manson is groomed within witchcraft and things like that to be the person he becomes. As Leonard Lake is involved with these pedophiles and these people, these practicing magicians. They're probably some of the same people.
Yeah, we can only guess if they were in attendance to some of these...
Well, I don't, that's what's interesting about this case, is I don't think we have to guess. I just going into this, didn't realize that there was going to be as much here as there is in the Manson case, that there was, because Leonard Lake, you know, there's a flash in the pan in his life, as he lives in Greenfield Ranch and then he kills all these people after he gets out of the Marines. But there's a rich tapestry of drug trafficking, secret societies, you know, human exploitation that you don't see on the surface level, just like in the Manson case.
Totally correct, yeah. Tell us about that. What are your leads towards secret societies, also with guardian angels, meth labs, the neighbors were into cooking and meth, things like that?
I can't find any information to corroborate that from mainstream sources. Going into what I wanted to do with this, I wanted to only use sources that I could cite, that I could say, this is where this came from. That's any information I'm saying from Lasseter's book or Eye of Evil, I'll say it's from there, because I'm not necessarily sure that the information contained in there is true, just like with the various documentaries that will call it Leonard Lake's Cabin. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
They will, oh, that's a huge oversight on their part. That's not his cabin. That's a man who has federal warrants out for him, who is being aided and abetted by his ex-wife. I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
From what you gather, is that, yeah, at that time. So I can't really make sense of what's out there for movies and books, because it all disagrees with each other. And that's why I find this Greenfield Ranch information, you can get the word straight from Oberon Zell's mouth. You know what I mean? He's still alive, and he'll talk about it in certain respects, whether it is whatever else he wants published, it's out there. There's been numerous articles where he's talking about his relationship with Leonard Lake, and he thinks he's a great guy.
Well, I saw that link that you sent me, and he spoke not very highly about Leonard Lake, more that he was a serial killer and a mass murderer, one of the greatest villains in the 20th century.
he also mentions in that clip, that's a small documentary made about him in the last couple of years, that Leonard Lake is hired to take pictures at local schools.
Yeah.
Right. And as much as there are conflicting reports in this case, I found it equally dubious that they seem to promote a narrative where Leonard Lake has never touched a recording device prior to the construction of the bunker. There's no, like, they make, like, every account I find makes especially certain to state that there are only the videotapes recovered and the Dubs video equipment. When there's overwhelming circumstantial evidence that says that's not the case. I mean, him taping the construction of the bunker, well, the Dubs disappear in 1974. He says in the beginning of that video, it's almost my 38th birthday, so the year is 1983.
I also observed that. Good point, yeah.
Right. There's a lot missing from this narrative, and it almost seems purposeful. And I find Dan Lasseter's comments about Die For Me, that it was a peaceful hippie commune, to just be a blatant disregard for existing facts in mainstream narratives. It's definitely a pot farm, Greenfield Ranch. There's definitely drug trafficking going on there. In No Thrill, No Kill, the author states that Leonard Lake and Charles Ng would rob Greenfield Ranch to make money. They would steal marijuana from there.
Yeah, selling that on the streets. So probably they had some kind of serious criminal underground connections.
Well, for one, it reinforces the idea that there are drugs at Greenfield Ranch. There's a massive drug operation going on, named by countless sources in both journalism and books written on the area.
How about reports about pedophilia? Because I can also recall that Leonard Lake was employed or worked at the local 4-H club, and at least to one report there were also allegations of ritual abuse.
I couldn't find any official sources correspond. That's McGowan's work, right?
Yeah.
Right. I couldn't find anything specifically on the 4-H club narrative, but I did find information that he taught a survivalist camp for boys. After he's kicked out of Greenfield Ranch in 81, he goes to work at a motel in the Anderson Valley.
Yeah, the Philo motel, yeah.
Yeah, this is allegedly where he hooked up with Charles Ng for the first time.
Tell us about that, about the circumstances at the motel, because he also posted an ad in a local newspaper.
What's the ad about?
Asking for a young girl for working in the motel.
The woman, she shows up and he tricks her well, he doesn't trick her, but he coerces her into having a threesome relationship with him and Cricket as a live-in housekeeper. Yeah, suppose when she leaves, it's, I believe, December of either 81 or 82, and it's 81 because that's when she says Charlie showed up.
What do you make of that FBI sting operation?
When he's originally busted?
Yeah, with Charles Ng, with all of that military equipment. There was also like a fall at the farm, right? At the ranch.
That's what I was also going to mention, is I can't find out whether or not that's Wilseyville or that's Greenfield, because if you notice, the press will start to call Wilseyville the ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell whether that's purposely to obfuscate what I'm trying to find out, but it almost feels that way. I can't find out whether or not it's in Wilseyville or it's in Greenfield. I find that.
Wasn't it described in Don Lasseter's work that it was in Greenfield Ranch?
And I thought that was because he got caught stealing stuff. There's people that say he got caught stealing weatherizing material.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, you're right. Maybe that was the case. Yeah.
And that's why he's kicked out of Greenfield Ranch. That's one of the narratives, is because that was it. Besides his ammo shed exploding, it was because you're not allowed to have to be on probation or something. It was. And they found out because he got fired from the Federal Housing Authority he was working for. But yeah, from the accounts I've read in news sources, that men came down out of helicopters to arrest them. Have you seen anything like that?
No, I only can recall reading about it, but never saw any physical evidence or anything.
Right. I think, yeah, he's kicked out of Greenfield for stealing the building materials, and then when him and Charles Ng are apprehended in the sting we're talking about, Charles Ng goes to Fort Leavenworth, and Leonard Lake posts bail and then hits the road. Well, goes to Wilseyville.
Yeah, and you did know that the property owned in Wilseyville was by his ex-wife's parents.
Parents, yeah. You can see the father next to Charles Ng. When Charles Ng is buffing the pad for the foundation for the bunker, Claralyn Balazs' father is standing right behind him.
Correct.
Right.
Did you found any interesting connections or revelations regarding their possible involvement?
I only can find that there's a deliberate attempt to make it sound like they're not involved, and that Cricket, the more I would read, the more I was realized how many crimes Cricket was implicated for. Is aiding and abetting a fugitive. She's an accessory to murder, and she never takes the stand. She gets a better deal than Kyla Homolka.
Yeah, for sure. But I can also recall in a news article that they did found at her parents' house like a whole bag of videotapes and also photo albums. So that's pretty suspected. Yeah, that's in the news.
You know what year?
I don't know. I can send you the news clipping. I found the news clipping.
Yeah, the last thing I saw of interest as far as newspaper reports come through is Charles Gunner. After all the digging around they do in 1985, Charles Gunner's corpse appears on the property in 1993.
Okay.
Right. That's when, by the new residents. The new residents, and that's the end of the case for me. Besides, there's an incident called the Teacup Incident in 1992, where National Geographic is taping Oberon Zell's pagan community. I think they're in a different location at this point, and they're having a ritual, or a party. He calls it a rave in one of his own books, where him and all the children are dressed up in lingerie. All the members of the pagan enclave are dressed up in lingerie and having a rave. And the National Geographic photographer is asked to surrender his film.
Okay.
And it's known in the pagan community as the Teacup Incident. It takes place in 1992 because a lot of the people in the community thought what just happened was not appropriate, as most people should.
Yeah,
but that's to show you what kind of behavior. I mean, he explains his rationale in the writings on this, that he thought this was appropriate behavior because the parents had consented to it. That's not how the law works. That's not how consent works in the United States of America. And you start to see this real separation of him from his ideas, from what the typical norm is here. And it's almost right in line with the narrative you see for Leonard Lake of him. The more you look into the case, the more of a raging pedophile he appears to be.
Possibly a protected pedophile.
Well, that's what makes all this. I believe that's what makes this so suspicious, is because you have the proximity. There are drugs being trafficked there. I mean, it seems like Leonard Lake killing himself was more of a convenience to anybody who would have been involved than it was to him. Because there's no trial, there's no evidence ever submitted about Leonard Lake.
Yeah, true. Totally true.
And I think like the Society for Creative Anachronism, there's numerous stories that come out of that of cult-like activity, child molestation, There's settled court cases. There's an Unsolved Mysteries episode called The Case of Kurt McFall, which is a kid from that area, gets mixed up in one of these groups and ends up getting pushed off a cliff, and he's covered in all these strange runic carvings. In that case, essentially, the police are unable to solve it. That's why it ends up on Unsolved Mysteries. But the pagan movement seems to foster this kind of environment that Leonard Lake was thriving in, where he certainly is mentioned to have developed his taste in BDSM while at the Greenfield Ranch community. I find that particularly dubious as well.
Yeah, he probably shared a lot of photographs and videotapes with members of the cult and others.
Right. There is an organized society there called the Church of All Worlds, and there's numerous other societies founded there in the timeline. I could spend the whole time naming that. You know, there's people like Gwendolen Petterin who set up a community called Anwithin, which Anwithin is the name of the Welsh underworld. And this is a community of fairy witches. And these are, you know, the people who live the next block over from Leonard Lake and Oberon Zell. But yeah, you were talking about Lasseter's work earlier, and if you go back through that, he makes the misstep of appropriating identity to both Tim Zell and Oberon Zell. He treats them as two different characters within the work, and I always found that kind of off.
Yeah, I used them by the aliases, but we can only wonder why. And now we know, I think.
Did you read the account of the first man to have contacted Leonard Lake through the classified ads he was trying to communicate with people from?
Yeah, but it was like 5 years or 6 years ago that I read the whole book. So memory's not really fresh.
That man he's a Marine. He visits the Greenfield Ranch compound in 1980 to meet with Leonard Lake while he's on leave. And that man then goes on to be deployed or assigned to a Marine base in Hawaii. And I believe this is around the same time that Charles Ng does his first robbery. I mean, he has the hit and run prior to that and a few kleptomaniac-related events, but this is when he does his big foray into crime, and he robs the armory. And only a year prior to that, Leonard Lake is meeting with somebody through a classified ad in Soldier of Fortune that's on his way to that location. Right. There's no clear connections in the Leonard Lake. Like, I can't sit here and say Leonard Lake directed this man to do this or he gave him instructions, but there's definitely this massive wealth of circumstantial evidence, just like you see in the Charles Manson case, that points to something greater than just a man who decided to build a bunker.
Yeah, I think if you only watch that whole video of Leonard Lake giving his philosophy, you can only guess what the hell is this? Is it some kind of manual for building a dungeon somewhere and keeping sex slaves? This is totally absurd.
In my own opinion, I believe it's almost a cover story.
Elaborate, please.
He says in the footage, there's parts of the footage that I don't know if it's the audio, if it's in the clip you have, just the clip you have, or it's in other versions of this, but when he's messing around with the camera on the back deck about halfway through, he mentioned something like, this is my first time using a camera like this, and then he starts to say something afterwards, and it's almost redacted. There are cuts in the audio 2 times, like in the times where Leonard will record over the existing video. And I mean, when he's pulling the backloader, the backhoe up the hill, you can hear a man with a pretty distinct Chinese accent say something. And then what sounds like either the same man or a woman's voice cheer when he starts to move the blade.
I'm positively that it's Claralyn.
Yeah, I believe so too, and that's why I started to believe he was purposely trying to make the tape something that it wasn't, because he says, I have 2 men here to help me.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, you're totally right.
Right. So I started to not believe what he, to me, I was, like you say, is I can't prove it, but I was almost positive that was her, and that was Charles.
Yep.
So I started to believe that he wasn't telling me the truth. And you have no reason to believe that a psychopath is telling you the truth when he records himself.
Yeah, he also mispronounced, instead of I, he said we, and he corrected himself quickly.
Say again?
He said on tape multiple times we instead of I, and he corrected himself.
Yes, he does. He does when he's sitting in the chair, and he does when he dubs over the tapes. I noticed that as well. I started to distrust the tape the more and more I analyzed it. And it's very hard to understand what's happening. It's because you're getting conflicting reports like that, or things that are constantly making you unsettled with how truthful it could be in the Leonard Lake case. But one thing is for sure is that he spends the most time he ever spends settled in one place is at Greenfield Ranch in his adult life.
Yeah, please tell me, what are your theories? What all your research you have done, all your personal knowledge? What have you come up? And you can also speculate a little bit if you want. What do you think happened at the ranch, and what was it all about, all those murders? I mean, we're talking about 25 people missing, including babies.
Yeah, I don't really like to speculate, but I do inherently when I read about these things. And from my research into the Process Church of the Final Judgment, I would imagine that when they subsequently diffuse after talking to Charles Manson, they scatter. According to the story of Charles Manson, when they visit him in court, that's according to Vincent Balazs too, is that the Process Church comes to talk to Charles Manson after he mentions them in the opening court statements and to police officers. And then they disappear from the California scene, but they were an intrinsic part of what was happening there in the pagan community. So Charles Manson's witches and all the black magic he seems to facilitate, there's drug running, there's prostitution, there's
Blackmail.
Blackmail, right? And there's almost everything you can see in the Leonard Lake case. There's the same MO. There's the same learned behaviors. These people don't come to these conclusions on their own. They don't get handed networks like this. Leonard Lake is mentioned in numerous accounts of people that he was a marijuana farmer, but that he detested it.
Correct. I also read that.
And
yeah.
You'd get the same accounts from Charles Manson, that he sometimes wouldn't take the acid. And I think it's almost like that same attitude you get from somebody like Mad Dog McKenna, where you deal in drugs and you deal in snuff porn and you deal in murder, but this is for something higher spiritually. Because this is for a greater purpose. Those are just consequences.
So you do think, especially the case of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng was connected possibly to the Process Church of the Final Judgment or another secret society with cult involvement?
I believe that the same networks that the ideas of all these different groups were allowed to flow through were open to accepting people from there. Yeah, I don't think you'd have a problem going from Charles Manson's retreat or Spawn Ranch and showing up at Greenfield Ranch. And I'm sure, like, I was investigating this because of Walter Breen's relation to Oberon Zell in the beginning. And then I started realizing that there's probably connections here between some of the same people.
Yeah.
And the same area, the article I sent you, I believe it was from the Oakleys. It was a local California paper, but it mentioned a man picking up a hitchhiker in the area.
Remind me?
It's an October 29th edition of a newspaper called the Oakleys out in Ukiah County. And a man, like a local, and the man's telling the story about picking up hitchhikers and Leonard Lake being there.
Yeah.
And he mentions a different cult that's there, and that's the Church of Universal Devotion, or Unlimited Devotion. And you do a little digging into that, and it's the same modus operandi. There's a male cult leader named Joseph, forget his last name at the moment, but he's surrounded by female followers. They supposedly commit acts of murder. And I think these groups, a lot of these groups serve to function to catch people in the subcultural, you know, and on the edges of the subculture, to kind of nurture them into what they want them to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what you have is the beginning of that kind of, I mean, in Dave McGowan's terms, it's an operation. It's a psychological operation. And you can't conduct it by the same conventional means you could before in America, so they begin to create something different. And the people that are participating in these events might not always be the worst, but there's somebody involved with the network who knows how to identify somebody like a David Berkowitz.
Or Ted Bundy.
Or Ted Bundy. And, I mean, Ted Bundy's an anomaly. Until you can get his occult background, it seems to only exist in text blurbs.
Yeah, I got one thing about Ted Bundy, an interesting revelation about the character named Thomas Creech. He was mentioned earlier also by George from CAFDEV, that he was a satanic motorcycle gang Satan worshipper, and probably responsible for at least 25 or 35 murders with cult involvement.
Jeez.
And really just astounding revelations that he also made to the Seattle police authorities, that he was responsible or at least in attendance when some of the missing girls in Seattle were slaughtered to death. But it just totally neglected everything and just went into the black box and, yeah.
Right, and I think particularly in the associations I'm making with Leonard Lake, you can see how, like, Walter Breen is taking children in 1964 who are involved with the science fiction fandom community. And that's a small niche group. And they create these groups, in my opinion, pedophiles, in order to isolate people and bring them into conditions more favorable to themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Walter Breen, the man I mentioned, who is friends with Oberon Zell, his mentor is a man named William Herbert Shelton. Remember last week we talked about connections to the Finders cult, and I said it's so hard to look for, I almost don't know what it is?
Yes.
So William Herbert Sheldon is also a numismatist, which is a coin collector. And he's also one of the more prominent in America. He gets a job at Yale. But he also creates a program. It was called the Great Ivy League Nude Photo Scandal when the story broke, where at all the Ivy League schools in America, they would take pictures of the colleges. They would take nude photos of the incoming freshman class to check for scoliosis. So this man's collection of all the different, like George Bush is rumored to be in there. Like these are Harvard, Yale, Brown, all top Ivy League schools. He had this program running. And his box of photos was discovered, I think, in the 90s. It's the New Yorker covered it. It was mainstream news. And they were doing construction on the gymnasium. And they found it in like a semi-hidden compartment in there. But with that collection of nude photographs was a note describing how they were cataloged. And at the title of that note, it said Finder's Aid. And I always thought that was interesting. And Walter Breen, the man who William Herbert Sheldon mentored, the famous numismatist, married to Marion Zimmer Bradley and friends with Oberon Zell, he is a physicist named Jack Sephardi came out and wrote that in the 60s, Walter Breen was trying to start schools for gifted kids, funded by the government, with William Herbert Sheldon. And now the Wikipedia for Walter Breen states that he did take out advertisements for this school for the gifted.
Okay.
And so this is where this is a man who's collecting gifted children who's a Walter Breen gets convicted of pedophilia. Marion Zimmer Bradley has to testify in court that she knew he was a pedophile in the 60s. He ends up dying in prison. So you have a man who's trying to start a school for gifted kids who's a notorious pedophile. You have his mentor leaving a cachet of nude pictures of young boys with a note next to it called the Finder's Aid. And I just thought that was about as interesting connection you're going to get, connecting Leonard Lake to the Finder's case.
That is certainly interesting, yeah.
Right. There's only allegations by that physicist and a few other people. There's no concrete evidence that Walter Breen ever had his government-funded school for the gifted started. But it again goes into this formula of isolating people into subcultures where you can better enact your own sick desires upon them.
Yes, it sure is. What do you think about that we know that Leonard Lake was a photographer and that also one of the victims, Harvey Dobbs, was also a photographer at children's parties?
Well, I found it really infuriating that they kept trying to make it seem like the Dobbs film equipment was the only film equipment Leonard Lake owned.
Yeah, that's totally...
And the narrative of the detective flipping over random pieces of film equipment and looking at the serial numbers when Leonard Lake is well stated he had his own camera equipment. But it's very, very careful anywhere you read to state that it always states it's only photography equipment. And just like in the tape, everybody wants to say that, that tape was his first time using a video camera.
Yeah, it really sounds like a cover-up video, yeah. In retrospect now.
Right, and he also says in the video, he doesn't say it's his first time. He says it's his first time outside with a video camera.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the way the house is set up is like a film studio, and the cops never acknowledging is there's eye hooks everywhere, there's bullet holes in the wall, there's blood all over everything. If you watch that videotape as well, you can definitely tell when Leonard Lake is not holding the camera.
Mm-hmm.
He has a very steady hand with that. Now, there's all sorts of evidence that Leonard Lake is photographer. He's 100% he's hired as a professional photographer by Oberon Zell to accompany him to the 1981 World Renaissance Fair in Minnesota. So that is direct evidence of him being hired as a professional photographer in 1981.
Yes.
And that same man goes on to state that he took pictures in schools. Now, we know Cricket worked in schools. I couldn't find her General Sessions Court information when she was teaching children how to blow up stumps or anything like that, though.
I can also recall that she was fired after inviting a girl to in a bathtub somewhere.
Really? I did not come across it. I'll try to find the link for mine. You try to find the link to yours.
Yep.
Have you come across any of the newspaper allegations that there were diskettes found at the house?
That there were what found?
There were computer disks found at the house that they
tell
thought
me.
they were going to have more information on, but they ended up to be blank. But the year is 1985. I mean, they're floppy disks at best on an Apple II, but they could have been on the bulletins, trade and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's definitely I believe it's a Sacramento Bee article that brings up the fact that they were hoping there would be something on the discs, but there was nothing on them.
Apparently.
Yeah, I mean, the same relations you see in the Jeffrey Dahmer cases. you can only bring these things. Well, that's what they kind of seem to plan these sorts of networks so that if something does happen, they're not uncovered.
Yeah, they're also probably obligated to get a diary of everything, like a sort of a social experiment.
Right. I believe that's one of the things that makes it difficult as a researcher as well, is that there's no way to discern what's an actual occult killing and what's a psychological operation and what's both combined.
Yep.
Because, like you're saying, is in the Ted Bundy case, certain people die on certain days. That's one of the theories. I don't see that in the Leonard Lake case, but I still see other links that remind me of Ted Bundy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. But what do you think those victims met their demise thanks to allegedly Leonard Lake and Charles Ng? I mean, there had to be some other motives, what you said, like drug connections, military connections at least, organized crime, maybe some competition, what I said about photography or things like that, some kind of weird blackmail.
The fact that the Guardian Angels guy is brought in by, what is that family's name again?
Robert Scott Stapley, I believe.
Yeah, the Stapleys, right?
Yes.
The fact that he's brought in, I believe the narrative is that she felt threatened by Leonard Lake. So she asked him to come stay with them. That's the mainstream narrative that I'm aware of. Well, Leonard Lake is a convicted fugitive, so if you're really that scared, you could have called the police at any time. Like, there's so many different newspaper accounts that say, Leonard Lake told me he was involved with a death cult, Leonard Lake threatened me, Leonard Lake shot my dog. Well, if at any time any of these people had called local law enforcement, Leonard Lake would be going to jail. Unless there's an instance where he was able to pass off one of his fake IDs.
Totally correct, yes. I can also recall that his neighbors, the O'Connors, Brenda O'Connor, saw him burying a body, she believed. And she told her mother, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that just kind of erroneous behavior on the part of these neighbors, and there's something else going on there. I mean, there's an account of the Stapleys watching pornography with him at one point, isn't there?
No, tell me.
I believe I heard that he was exchanging pornography with one of his neighbors. I can't remember the exact source, so I won't delve into it too much here.
No.
If you remember it, I'd probably, but there's a lot like that in this case of him telling weird things to his neighbors. And then in the same vein, there'll be an article from the same time period about the same case that will say, oh, Leonard liked the Bible. Leonard liked to help kids or something like that.
Yeah, there are a lot of weird things. I think also at least one employer of where Ng was employed was abducted and killed at the ranch.
I think it's 2 or 3 of them are killed from the moving company.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I didn't really.
But that makes Charles Ng pretty suspected. Like he's really involved in some of the killings, or probably the killings were being perpetrated by multiple.
I also believe there's a certain threshold when you perform these acts. Is you might do professional killings, which is alleged in this case, like Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. This is one of the weird things the neighbors say in the local press, is that they used to say they were mercenaries. But there are also distinct crimes of just killing people.
Yes.
And it's hard to differentiate motive, but I believe that different motives at different times. And, I mean, this is a wild 3 years in these men's life. I mean, prior to Charles Gunner, there's no real evidence of them killing anyone. I mean, maybe the brother, Donald Lake.
Yeah, maybe Leonard Lake in Vietnam.
Right. Right, so he begins killing, he's kicked out of Greenfield Ranch in 1981, the same year that he goes on tour with Otter Zell taking pictures of unicorns that he helped surgically alter. That, in the next 3 years, he'll go on to kill 10 to 25 people. So everything that happens has to happen there, according to the official narrative.
Which is
But
probably
the bunker's under construction in '83. The bunker is not done in October of 1983. So the use of the bunker is always what's associated with this case, but the use of the bunker really only takes place from either late '83 to '85, and that's it.
Yeah. I also recognize that timeline. It didn't add up to the official story.
Not a single part of it does. From Leonard Lake's military career forward, you can find multiple accounts of what he was doing. What is consistent is that he lived in a pagan community founded by pedophiles, or pedophile apologists, and that he lived in the proximity of a drug network, and that he developed Cricket in news articles calls him pagan, says he was a pagan.
Yep.
And so this man, the way that this man identifies before he kills himself is developed at Greenfield Ranch.
Well, I think he also had some mental issues when he was in Vietnam, and probably also before.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if they did any autopsies on his brain, and he maybe had like a Arthur Shawcross style shunt in there or something.
Do we know that he experimented with drugs in the army?
If Leonard Lake did?
Yeah.
I couldn't find any evidence on Leonard Lake
or
using
also,
drugs.
Also unwittingly, maybe unwittingly.
I couldn't find any evidence of that because, there's a suspicious amount of time spent in mental institutions. 2 years is a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's how long he's rumored to be at Camp Pendleton. But his terms of service don't make sense to me because if he deploys in 1965 to Da Nang, that is not a good, it's not like he avoided war completely by being in Da Nang. Like, that was a very dangerous place. They took a lot of mortar fire. The Marines were there, so they went under, heavier objectives, or went after heavier objectives than the other bodies of the military. And then if he's so messed up, how is he mentally capable of volunteering to go back?
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, go on.
The way that the narrative goes from all sources is that something happens to him during his second tour that messes him up. And he's sent home.
What do you think happened?
I think whatever did happen is deliberately hard to find. I think we need an FOIA request for his DD-214 form.
Also for Rodney Alcala, maybe the exact same thing happened to him.
What, that he has a very, very mysterious military background?
Yeah, and also a very mysterious military discharge. But I must acknowledge that also it was also in the timeline that his father died, so that's also pretty devastating.
Yeah. That's what makes these things hard to figure out, is because that's a normal excuse for somebody undergoing a breakdown like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I mentioned it. So.
Yeah, there's nothing I can see, and like I said, is by the time this investigation is underway, the police should have a copy of this man's DD-214 and should be giving the proper information to reporters. But we can see that in the 1984-1985 timeline, there's conflicting reports: radar operator, aviation technician. Well, those are completely different jobs, and they have different numbers associated with them.
But what do you think the reason is that it is confidential? His aviation connections, possibly.
where I'm at right now in the research, I mean, my opinion tends to flip the more and more facts I see way a different one way or the other, but I believe he saw combat and he had PTSD.
Yeah, I also believe that. I didn't, yeah.
There's not a lot of Marines who went to Da Nang who didn't see combat. The fact that you keep seeing this term, non-combatant, regurgitated over and over again, like there's that, you can see where some of these stories get absorbed by some of the mainstream writers. I mean, when I was researching Joel Norris's work, have you ever heard of this book, Horn of the Unicorn?
Yeah, do you own it?
Yeah, I cannot find a copy of that
No,
for the life
me
of me.
too.
Yeah, I can't find a legal PDF, I can't find Deep Web, I can't find anything of that.
I know. Like 5 years ago, I searched for it for like a month straight.
It was probably only $400 then, too. You could have got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's the lowest one I saw was $700.
Yeah.
And that's what's weird is Joel Norris's work is particularly dubious too, is because he's one of the authors who I found was regurgitating points from other people. And like in his Compendium of Serial Killers, you know the work I'm talking about? It's like Joel Norris Serial Killer Encyclopedia or something.
I haven't read it, but heard about it, yeah.
Right. I was looking in it for source material, and I believe he states that it's Leonard Lake's cabin. And if you're going to be a crime writer...
Yeah, he's incorrect, yeah.
Right. So I kind of got discouraged to throwing down $1,000 of money for a book. I heard it's very short, too, and he writes those, like Opperman was talking about, is some people blast out crime novels.
Yeah, but listen, I have to acknowledge that I own a book about Jeffrey Dahmer from him, and that book is really good, really, some really fascinating other points of views of that whole case, so...
Well, you can only imagine that Horn of the Unicorn is about this conversation we're having right now. That's what I kept imagining, is this guy probably stumbled onto this before us.
Yeah, I also like the way he writes in a sort of conspiracy manner, and that there's something else behind the surface.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to knock him as an author. I'm just saying that in these books, you start to see these points regurgitated that there's really no basis in truth for.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I would love to be able to question Dan Lassiter about this, because I know he sat during the trial of Charles Ng, but where were you able to gain access to Leonard Lake's military history?
I don't know.
Like, 'cause in most mainstream narratives, they won't give it to journalists. That's not a normal thing. It's not a normal thing to not be able to find out what somebody did in the military history. That's public record.
Yeah, we should try in the Freedom of Information Act, you're right.
I would. I actually kind of wanted to talk to you about that offline or online or something to figure out how to get one of those done.
No, I will communicate it with George from CAFDEF. He's a good person, so he will put some work energy to at least do a request. Yeah.
Because I started typing up the whole timeline of Leonard Lake, citing all the sources I could from all the authors. I mean, all we really have is No Thrill, No Kill, The Letters of Charles Ng, Die for Me, and Eye of Evil.
Yeah. I own Eye of Evil, yeah. Also.
Those are the only 4 works on the subject. And even the timeline that I made has conflicting dates. Like when he arrived at Greenfield Ranch, I can't directly pinpoint that at 1975. Most people will just kind of glaze over it and say he got into the hippie communal life in the early 70s.
I can also recall there were some serious gaps in his timeline, that even some authors acknowledged that nobody knew exactly what he was doing at that point in time.
Yeah. I mean, he attended numerous colleges, according to these authors. So there's a paper trail there that I'd be interested in investigating as well.
Let's go back and talk about Leonard Lake, the Leonard Lake family in general. What are your thoughts? Because there are also, I think even some authors acknowledge that at a young age he was photographing his sisters in sexual poses and things like that. And also the mother of Lake was involved with cricket in confiscating some videotapes and other incriminating material.
Well, that right there also doesn't fit the mainstream narrative, because Leonard supposedly disdains his mother. I mean, he's offered the chance to live with her again in his teen years, and he flat out doesn't want to live with her because of her relationship with his brother.
Yep.
And I find it equally strange that his mother also says that she feels as though Leonard killed Donald, but is still there willing to support him with cricket. So, I mean, it seems like I don't like to draw a reference from TV shows too often, but have you ever seen True Detective?
Yeah, of course, man. One of my favorite series.
Have you seen the second season, right?
Yeah, and I was looking at the third season.
I believe that there are references to the Leonard Lake case in the second season, like the main character, the policewoman who's raped as a child, the man who abducts her, when she has her flashback scene, says, "Do you want to come look for a unicorn with me in the woods?"
Yeah, you're right.
Right. So I believe that what the director was trying to show was that there were relationships in California formed before the hippie movement.
Yeah, you're totally fucking right. Yeah, man.
Yeah, and they fostered both the good ideas and bad ideas that would continue to grow in that area.
Yeah, the father of the character of Rachel McAdams was in some kind of weird cult, and there were also some kind of...
He almost seems like a Oberon Zell type character.
Yeah, that's a good comparison, man. Nice. I also got a quick side note. Have you seen the movie Mr. Nobody with Jared Leto?
No.
Oh, you have to see that, because it's a very beautiful movie, but there's one important scene in his childhood which exactly corresponded with Leonard Lake and his mother leaving him at the railway station.
Right.
But you have to see it. I hope some people who are listening this podcast say, "Oh yeah, I saw that movie." But no.
That's I think that's a particularly interesting point, and I believe that talk that the father gives to his daughter at a certain point when she's questioning him about the relationships he had at the time, he talks about this intersectionality where people had different beliefs but still came together in the thoughts of the new age.
Yep.
And these are the same kind of subcultures where you can isolate somebody for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, it's also always funny how the medium of movies and television series turns reality into fiction and vice versa.
Well, one of Marion Zimmer Bradley and Walter Breen, one of their big things when Marion Zimmer Bradley is finally brought to testify against her husband, she comments that she was aware of her husband's position about pedophilia as an intellectual, but she wasn't aware that he had physically had sex with children. So there's this idea even in the science fiction community at the time that pedophilia is being treated a lot like homosexuality, as it's conservative to not embrace it. And there's a defense of this intellectual embracing of pedophilia at Berkeley University, which is in the area of all that's happening. It's where Marion Zimmer Bradley spends a lot of her time. Right, there's sort of a defense of it that comes up from the artistic community, the academic community. But yeah, that note about the unicorn, I thought that was crazy when I saw it.
The second season was released in 2015, but I rewatched the whole season 2 like 6 months ago, so it was really fresh, so I can totally recall all those scenes, yeah. And it was truly...
Right, and I almost think that entire script is lifted from Program to Kill, is the idea of it comes from what David McGowan is trying to explain to people, is that there are a lot of horrible events that happen in different places, different times. Not all of the people do know each other, but there's an intersectionality there. There is something nefarious at the heart of this.
Yeah.
Their ideas created in this environment
The
that foster
psychosphere.
what's going to take place.
The psychosphere.
Right. The psychosphere, yeah.
Have you,
what these people talk about in the occult is causal and acausal energies and high magic and low magic.
There's also a very good website called Subliminal Synchro Psychosphere. You also have to look it up. Very good website.
Right, subliminal single psychosphere. I think I've been there before. No, I believe that that's what McGowan was trying to show, is that the things that are being brought up on the surface level are only to protect what's underneath. And what's underneath is an intersectionality. That's why a lot of the work I tried to do to prep for this interview is I tried to find links between Walter Breen and John D. Norman.
Yes.
And it would bring up things that I don't want to look into. It would bring up publications called Pan, which Pan is a pagan, he's the goat god in the woods with the flute. And he wrote, Walter Breen wrote for Pan, and I could see that John D. Norman was mentioned in there, but when I tried to access the page, there's a naked child in the magazine. So I'm not researching that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally can relate to that.
I think if through this case you could find a link for who is the man in Texas who had the pedophile network?
Dean Coral.
Right, somebody like Dean Coral or John D. Norman being associated with Walter Breen. Well, then you have another part of this conspiracy closer to Leonard Lake. I always thought Leonard Lake was an outlier in this, and he might have just been a crazy person. But the fact is he's associated in the same environment that nurtured Manson, that nurtured a number of killers at the time.
Yep. Yeah, maybe the ranch was also used as some kind of chill spot by some of those individuals, and Leonard Lake and Charles Ng and Claralyn were living there, but there were also many other people in attendance there. I mean, it was a big property, and we only know how many bodies there were found, and kind of weird rituals, and that an incinerator. They made movies. There was
But there was still a cult there when I was researching this. There was still a group of people, I was saying that Spinner's cult mentioned in that Halloween article, is they're supposedly still active in the area.
Still?
Yeah.
Oh, that's reassuring.
There are groups or like gangs associated with the Grateful Dead. Like, I don't use my real name in any of this, but Grateful Dead family, they traffic acid to the shows, and they'll bury acid at a venue like months before the show. But I've known some people who are in that. They drive in convoy and stuff like that so they can protect their drugs, but they move them in the concert scene. And they mentioned, and the articles I found mentioned the Spinners being associated with the GDF.
Did you also said that the Greenfield Ranch was now actually a movie studio?
I read that it was a movie studio at the time. I mean, it's such a huge property. They make it, I mean, it's 5,600 acres.
And the value was estimated at $50 million, right?
Right. They were trying to sell it. There's reports from 2018 of a giant marijuana fire happening at the ranch, where I think they lose like 80 pounds of marijuana to fire. And I know the Greenfield Ranch was also affected by the wildfires that just took place. Right, so they definitely are trafficking drugs there. I think that was a link before that was not really highlighted by either the mainstream authors or journalist reports. But I think if you could find some sort of association, or if anybody could, I mean, I'm not really a journalist or a professional journalist. I'm an amateur internet detective.
Yeah, likewise, man. But you're also really articulate, so.
There's a lot of opportunity here for people. I mean, if I was in school and I was writing a research paper, there's stuff here that people haven't covered. there's an opportunity to get work published and things like that, is because there's so many unturned stones in these cases. And I have a feeling the more of them we turn over, the more we're going to see some sort of network where people like Walter Breen and John D. Norman and Dean Cora were able to exchange ideas.
And John Wayne Gacy.
Well, I found links between, not links, but similarities between Lake and Gacy. Is that Leonard Lake, when he's given his job with the Federal Housing Authority, he has he's basically a carpentry contractor with a bunch of boys working for him. Okay. And there's numerous accounts in Eye of Evil and Die For Me where he's trying to pimp their girlfriends, he's trying to get special favors.
Incredible, just incredible.
At the same time where Leonard Lake has that position with the Federal Housing Authority, he's living on Greenfield Ranch. Oberon Zell has a position with what's called the Human Development Corporation, which is it's an employment agency, or employment assistance agency.
What do you make of the relationship between Leonard Lake and Charles Ng? What is it exactly? What do you think?
I don't know what to make of it, because at the beginning they can't even get the story straight with whether they meet through a War Games magazine or whether they meet through Soldier of Fortune.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some survivalist magazine. Yeah.
Right. I told you in our previous conversation, the one link I found in that case that I could never understand when I looked at it years ago was that there's supposedly a picture of Leonard Lake in the Society for Creative Anachronism. And we already see that Leonard Lake wears robes and things like that. And if you could find something that would tie Charles Ng to the Greenfield Ranch, I think it would bring more evidence to the fact that something was going on there. But I don't understand their relationship. That you hear that it's either a posting in a War Games classified or that Leonard Lake is trying to sell guns through Soldier of Fortune classified.
Yeah. The last time we spoke, you also mentioned about the photograph of Charles Ng as a ninja, but I was thinking about it and I can't recall vaguely, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I saw that on the internet. You were right.
Yeah.
And I also found I've also found a news article that Charles Ng actually believed that he was a reincarnated ninja from Japan, Tokyo.
What? You know how he holds up the courts at the end? Like he does everything he can to prolong his life through the court system of California?
Correct. It was one of the most expensive court cases around the time.
One of the allegations he brings against the to the courts is that he thinks that he's being racially stereotyped by all the different articles in the press about him knowing karate. And he claims to not know karate.
Yeah? Really?
Yeah, that's how he holds up the courts at the end. Because he says the prison food makes him sick, the location makes the people biased, and that he was being racial stereotyped by the press.
But do you think he was sincere about the remark that he wasn't fascinated by martial arts? Because I really thought he was.
Well, his entire history makes no sense. The fact that he's able to fake his nationality to join the United States Marines is not...
Yeah, that's really suspected.
Not something many people are able to do. It's not the French Foreign Legion over here.
Isn't that then maybe not naive to believe that there were some kind of profiled candidates, those two, like Leonard Lake and Charles Ng, maybe by some kind of entity? I
believe so. I mean, Charles Ng almost has a Charles Manson-like childhood. He's beaten, he goes all over to different places, he has family all over the place, he consistently breaks the rules, and he seems to be offered a choice is what it seems like. I don't know how you can get in a hit and run in America and then fake your identity to join the Marines or fake your nationality. You're on paper. You're a foreign person who has hit somebody with your car.
Yep.
So that whole his whole being in the military is complicated enough that there's something else to it, because like I said, when you get out of the military, there's a piece of paper that says everything you did, every award you had, everywhere you went, how many years you were in, what bases you were on. And I think it's a strange part of that relationship is that part in Die for Me, where the soldier from the Marines goes and meets Leonard Lake. I think Leonard Lake is using the Mike Turner alias at the time. And he then goes on to be stationed in Hawaii right before Leonard Lake commits his armory burglary.
Yeah, also the whole, when they were caught, the whole shoplifting deal was also pretty suspected.
I was saying to my wife the other day, if I was operating a criminal syndicate and I had somebody in my gang who talked about taking cyanide, that is the easiest person to set up ever.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, in every work you can find on Lake, he mentions to almost everyone he knows that he has cyanide. And that if the cops ever come, he's going to eat it. So I don't understand, if you're a particularly secretive person, why you're telling people that.
Yeah, you're totally right. I just want to mention I think that was some kind of lie or some kind of...
It's like the tape. It's not believable. It's even like that's the Robin Stapley's the woman in the tape, right? Who gets her bra cut off?
No, I think Kathy Allen or Brenda O'Connor.
Oh yeah, Brenda O'Connor. But that to me, that event to me seems scripted. It seems like they're shooting a pornography tape.
Yeah. Yeah, I also read comments under my video from how can those women be so calm? I mean, they were also like very compliant.
And I theorize GHB or the scopamine that they always mention in conspiracy forums, but I don't know. I mean, they mention the light a few times.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And if and you don't know, you might be one of these people who ends up in a psychiatric ward but uses the same techniques he found there on other people, like Ed Kemper.
Yeah.
I always question the women's psychological state in relation to the situation they're in. There's not a lot of screaming, there's not a lot of bruising on the women they show in the tapes. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, of course. I always was very suspected of the portions of the tapes.
Right. So that leads me to believe or speculate that was a film studio there. And I don't know what Claralyn Balazs' connection to it is, other than there are articles that state that he's living there with a woman by the local press after he kills himself. So there are local paper articles that say Leonard Lake, who is living with a woman in his remote 2.6-acre ranch.
Yeah, but if we really think realistically, the property was owned by the parents of Claralyn Cricket Balazs.
You can find in some sources, and I can never find anything to verify this, that Leonard Lake, you always see that he's preaching the apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
I don't see any instance of where that actually takes place in any of the narratives.
No, but I can recall seeing also a videotape, the philosophy tape, and you can also see some of Leonard Lake's family sitting in the same room where you're sitting on that couch, and they were listening like really trance-like when he was talking about the apocalypse. But that was also like 12 years ago, 15 years ago that I saw those small clips on YouTube back then.
Well, it's important to remember those things, as circumstantial as the evidence is.
With Gloria Eberling.
With who?
Gloria Eberling. She was present, if I recall correctly.
The girlfriend?
No, that was her name. I don't know. It was a relative of the Leonard Lake family, if I remember correctly.
I'm going to double check my notes in a minute, but I think he was dating a woman named Gloria Eberling at one point. I've always heard that, and I've heard that he was preaching it to his family. I've seen that too somewhere, but that is kind of validated by the mother being there with Cricket at the end. It's because nowhere in the narrative does it make sense that Leonard Lake's mother would even be with Cricket.
No, exactly.
Right. That's the only narrative I can find to validate that, or hypothesis I can create on my own, is that there's a cult within a cult.
A cult of witches.
Right, but the way that a lot of these New Age groups operate is like the Church of All Worlds I told you, founded by Oberon Zell, is that church is a collection of nests, and the nests are allowed to believe in whatever they want. Is people create different groups based on their different beliefs, but they're all part of the same New Age belief body under the Church of All Worlds.
What do you make of the cartoons drawn allegedly by Ing in prison? And I'm talking specifically about the cartoons where you saw microwave babies on plates, and you also saw a sign with "Here's Scant's Daycare Center." Like they were probably human trafficking and also selling babies.
Well, he admits to selling a baby on film.
Yeah.
They admit to moving that baby to a different place.
To a family in Fresno, yeah.
He either says in response to that woman, he says, better than baby dead, right?
Yeah, your baby is sound asleep like a rock.
Yeah. And, yeah, I mean, through Eng's own confession on that tape, there's evidence of human trafficking. And that's what they convicted him with, was that evidence of the man he was passing those pictures to. I think his name is Lagarde. Hold on, can you look for it? Yeah, well, the man that he's passing these notes to in prison, the police, I mean, the DA of California pays him for his testimony in that case. He's paid $30,000, and then he is driving, he's supposed to testify in the case, and he's driving away. He's in Canada, I believe, and he's hit by a car with $20,000 cash in his own car, and he's killed. Yeah, and if you actually watch the court case, the prosecuting attorney for California is able to validate that the Canadian prisoner that Eng was sharing these photos with knew, well, Eng did communicate to him that he was shackling the women.
Yep. And also hold a taser gun.
Say again?
He also hold a taser gun or stun gun.
What do you mean?
Charles Ing.
That he would use a stun gun on the women?
Yeah, it's seen on the videotapes that he was holding a stun gun.
Oh. I can't, the videotapes are very grainy. I tried to go through them and make out whatever I could. Did you see the gun on the table?
No, can't recall.
In the court, in the testimony, a way they start to show Charles Ing's complicity in the case is that he reminds Leonard Lake that he left the gun sitting on a coffee table next to one of the victims while they're saying all this awful stuff to her. She's got a loaded handgun sitting right next to her. And that's one of the ways they start to show that he was active in the decision-making process of the killing.
Yeah.
But I don't know what to make of it. I don't believe that drawings are testimony. And I don't know, like Charles Ing was somebody that liked to please, that liked to get approval from somebody else.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily, they didn't find a microwave baby. In fact, they only recover what they find are infants' teeth. There's a corpse of one child, right? Because the entire Dubs family is not found.
Yeah, what do you make of this? To speculate, do you think those people were involved in human trafficking, so maybe at least the kid is still alive and with a different...
their modus operandi changes so much that I believe they had their hand in crime. I believe they were making money through crime. There's the different narratives of them stealing pot, them robbing houses of guns. You'll see this in the mainstream narratives that there was a number of burglaries around the area they're in.
Yeah.
And then there are the crimes where they go to like, I don't know. I found them all. They're all so complicated, but they're glazed over so easily. Like the man who's a disc jockey, who's advertising blowjobs in the want ads. Like there's a few times in these cases where disc jockeys come up. In the John Benet Ramsey case. And disc jockeys always seem to be an interesting target of people associated with the Program to Kill network.
Yeah, also with the Joran van der Sloot case.
Oh yeah?
Natalie Holloway case. There was also a disc jockey on the boat who was probably complicit in the murder or rape. Let's say rape.
So, without knowing motive, you know what I mean? Without knowing motive, there's a lot of suspicious deaths. There's a fair amount of just women who they make disappear, but there's also people who seem to be specifically targeted. And my opinion is that they killed the Dubs family for duplicating equipment, and that the entire report published in almost every single narrative on this about there being no videotape copies, there's no doubles of any videotapes, it's just a lie. It was a lie.
Yeah, do you know, I released a portion of a news clip about the Dubs family, like an archive news broadcast, and they tell in the news broadcast that they found, we're still looking for the perpetrators behind the disappearance, and they were looking for a big Caucasian women, heavy-set Caucasian women. And to make a long story short, they found or had composite sketches of two people who didn't add up at the physical resemblance of Claralyn and Leonard. Only the Chinese man, Ing, was probably positively identified, but the two other people...
killing the disc jockey, right?
I don't know.
I know that...
But it is interesting that apparently there were all other people responsible for the Dubs family disappearance. Not only Leonard Lake and Charles Ing.
I mean, their name reminds me of the Kurt McFall case. It's almost too ironic that they steal photo duplicating equipment from the Dubs family. And you know what I mean? It just never added up to me why they can't find the bodies. The only witness is the circumstantial evidence of a phone call the night they disappeared. And that the only other evidence is that they supposedly found equipment on Leonard Lake's property. But the narrative they push from that is that Leonard Lake wanted his video equipment. Now that's patently false. Leonard Lake has his own video equipment.
Yeah, what do you think the motive is then, if that's a lie? What do you think the Dubs family met their demise at such a...
I don't know. If you were trying to associate Claralyn, the only other thing I could find was that Charles Gunner's body had two different gunshot wounds in it. But I can't even speculate on why they would be taken.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe not wise to speculate.
Huh?
No, you're probably right. It's not always wise to speculate. So get to the facts, yeah. Hold
right,
the facts.
And I really tried to look into finding the case where they were hunting people on their own property, and I couldn't find it. I found that there were people who were like...
I found some news articles. I inserted them in Program to Kill.
That they were hunting men on their property?
Yeah.
They have a 2.6 acre property.
Yeah.
That they're in the center of. It would take about 1 minute for somebody to get off that property if they ran in a straight line as fast as they could.
Yeah, but it's not easy if you're blindfolded, for example.
Did it mention that in the article, blindfolds?
No, but not to be morbid, but that's the way I should do.
Yeah, well, that's the way you have to think in this. There's limits to it, but you do have to think, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I honestly, I couldn't make anything of the more extreme aspects of the case, except that they were very popularized by the media, who at the same time couldn't seem to keep track of what had happened to Leonard Lake for 6 years of his life in Vietnam in the Marine Corps.
Do you think he killed his brother?
Yes, I think.
Don't you think it was some kind of warning, perhaps? I know he did hate his brother because he had a mental defect and he had disability, and Leonard Lake hated those people, but still, yeah.
Well, supposedly he's cashing his brother's disability check at a certain point
truly,
in time.
unconsciously.
Yeah, I don't know. There seemed to be crimes that were specific targets, and then there were crimes of people who just look specifically like Leonard Lake. There's about 4 men who look almost, they look like him in a police lineup that he kills.
Yeah, but that's pretty. That's only supports that he was indeed killing people only for his identity, for mistaken identity theft. Yeah.
Well, and it shows premeditation for further acts of greater criminal intent.
Yep.
And I've always thought that this is a man who was loaded to the teeth, had an array of IDs, he had plenty of money, and Die For Me, it mentions that he had $30,000 in silver buried.
Yeah.
Yeah, and supposedly, from what I can find from the narrative of Greenfield Ranch, when they ask him to leave, they have to buy him out of his share. Now, he supposedly ingratiated himself with a woman named Venus Salem. She was an older hippie, an older woman, and he had moved on to her ranch to help her fix things, and then somehow got her to sell him part of her portion. And so in 1981, when he's kicked out of the ranch on his probation violation, he makes $70,000.
Nice. For that time.
So he's got $70,000 before he ever even makes it to that motel.
Where did you find that information?
How did I find out about I'll forward you. I have it.
The financial aspects. I never read that. I can never recall reading that. Also not in Die For Me.
Yeah. No, I have it. I'll send it right to you.
Okay, nice.
I'll send you everything I have on here, because there's a slideshow here for sure. There's a cow, a unicorn, But, yeah, that I never understood, the more I would learn about how much money he made off of Greenfield Ranch, and the supposed silver I believe it's the housekeeper from the motel, the woman they have a threesome with, who he tells about the silver he has buried and Die For Me. But
yeah, that's also what I recall.
Where is the need to rob all these people? If he didn't blow $70,000 on that bunker, I mean, he did the work himself.
No, I do know that he spent a lot of money on investing in that bunker. I mean, you need quite a lot of material to build that, so it's not inexpensive.
But he didn't pay for labor.
No, but all
no,
of
it... I mean, it doesn't seem like he'd need to finance it through that. He's not paying anything but rent.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And there's a time, I believe it's when they killed a used car salesman. I forget his name off the top of my head right now, but you know the man I'm talking about, right?
Only his face, but I also can't recall his name now.
Right, there's a used car salesman who they end up, in the beginning, kidnapping, and they try to bring him to the ATM. And they try to get him to take his money out, and he won't do it. And Leonard Lake, in his own diaries, calls this a failure. But he says, Charles' debt to me is paid. Yeah, I always thought that was a way to show. I believe he manipulated Charles A. I don't put any fault on the courts for trying to make it seem like that wasn't an issue. But Leonard Lake is definitely in charge of their relationship.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And also what you said, Charles Ng was probably a follower, not a leader.
Right.
What do you make of the fact that Leonard Lake was heavily obsessed with the book The Collector, and also Bob Bederla from Kansas City?
I think it's circumstantial evidence of a network that shares materials like that, because I think that's a popular thing for sick people. And I think there's people that probably promote reading that book somewhere in one of these strange groups.
Yeah, same perception, yeah.
Right, but I don't know. You're never going to find the serial killer convention. These things happen at FantaCon and Renaissance fairs and different hippie communes. There's always something assembled for a seemingly good purpose that these people operate under. Like, in its ideal form, the Charles Manson's community seems great. But because of the drug dealing and the human trafficking and the killing and all sorts of things they were indulging in, it was something else entirely.
Yep.
And I think that's the same instance you have at Greenfield Ranch. Is you have secret groups, you have secret religions, non-mainstream religions, where people are getting isolated, living in communities where in the community at Greenfield Ranch, polyamory, which, you know what that means?
Please tell us all. For my
like many wives, many husbands.
Yeah.
Well, Greenfield Ranch was like one of the first places to where people outwardly promoted a polyamorous lifestyle outside of the Latter-day Saints Church. Oberon Zell and his wife are very vocal advocates of polyamory and nudism. So, I mean, at face, on the surface level, a lot of these places are hippie communes and nudist camps. But when you really get into it, they create opportunities for people like this to exploit.
Yeah, probably in every secret society, there's a secret society in a secret society. So. Right.
Isn't it Gary Steiner who ends up at a nudist camp when he's on the run from the law?
Yeah. True. And Yosemite.
Yeah, so you start, these are the same networks you keep seeing over and over again, is the type of places that facilitate this sort of openness.
Yeah, it is truly incredible how all those connections are on the surface, but also above the surface, yeah.
Well, some of the young women the young woman that Leonard Lake conducts his longest affair with, there's a narrative where he tries to have sex with that woman's little sister at a community skinny dipping function at Greenfield Ranch. And nobody says anything about it. It's like the teacup incident. There's a bunch of young children, like 10, 11, 12 years old, wearing lingerie, dancing at a rave, and nobody says anything.
Yeah, they're all complicit in some kind of sexual advantage.
Right.
Yeah.
And you start to see this sort of, like, it's almost like the police, if they are doing their job, if they're not complicit in this, then they're at least triaging a lot of these more horrible crimes against the fact that there's an underbelly of pedophilia going on. Is they're saying, well, this is so bad right now, we're not going to overwhelm the press.
Yeah.
But it's obvious there. Leonard Lake is a pedophile. And you don't see that, even in the Wikipedia, you don't see he's a pedophile.
No, yeah, it is, I don't know, it's really, really sick.
Right. Yeah, I believe Leonard Lake, I mean, and it's the same, you see the same thing with Claralyn. Claralyn is aiding and abetting a fugitive. She's an accessory to murder. But her crimes, you know what I mean? It's like Karla Homolka. They just don't even want to talk about it. Like Karla Homolka is inserting dead body parts of the victims into herself.
I read about that, but I also thought it was rumor-based. Do you think it's accurate?
I thought it was in the court testimonies. It was a news report about the jurors being disgusted that they were shown that kind of material.
I can't recall having read that ever, but I wouldn't doubt it. I don't know, but there were a lot of conflicting stories around that whole case due to the publication ban.
But yeah, the headmistress Carla and things like that.
Yeah. Also the rumors with Florida.
Nobody can say if it's real.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, I think it's real. Yeah, I also think that they had sexual acts with dead bodies. They were truly also necrophiliacs. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think a lot of this sort of organization within an organization we talk about operates within some of the pornographic film networks and BDSM conventions and things like that. Before Mad Dog McKenna is arrested for the final crime he's incarcerated on, is he puts out an ad in the newspapers to sell footage of a girl being eaten by a snake and a girl being eaten by an alligator or something like that.
Yep.
So there is a network where he's able to take out these ads, and they clearly say what they are.
Yeah, it's fucking sick. It's just.
Right. I would think some interesting points of evidence that I'd like to see people look into is there's all sorts of access to the old Californian newspapers, and I'd love to run all of the different Leonard Lake alibis through the classifieds. Well, that's where I was getting in my research. Is that's how deep it goes. Is it's there, as it should be, right? If there's allegations of him using the classified ads to find these people, well, the publication should exist.
Yeah. Yeah, we also should put some effort in those Freedom of Information Acts regarding his military career.
Yeah, I mean, be groundbreaking journalism, I guess.
Yeah, and yeah, no, I honestly, I also thought this podcast, this episode was truly mind-blowing, and it's really some good investigative work, man. I take my hat off for you.
Yeah. Last thing I'd like to say is there's probably an association somewhere between the likes of John D. Norman and his network and Walter Breen writing the paramount text to pedophilia.
Yeah.
And I would love to see some investigation going that way. I know there's more people like us, so.
Yeah, I also have to tell some listeners and subscribers that I asked 2 months ago to give some donations regarding the Freedom of Information Act of Dean Cole in Houston, Texas. And we have collected all the money, and probably in March we get the Freedom of Information Act of the Dean Kroll case, including 66 photographs. So I will keep everyone updated to those new developments.
Excellent.
I really hope that we get some information provided regarding John D. Norman. Maybe, or maybe it's blacked out. It was an FBI matter.
Yeah, I mean
it's worth a shot.
Say what?
It's worth a shot.
Yeah, it absolutely is. There's only so much circumstantial evidence before you start a movement like Pizzagate, you know?
Yep.
And the sad thing is this is Pizzagate.
Yeah. I honestly also believe that John D. Norman was one of the founding fathers of Pizzagate and things like that. He was like really laying the groundwork of all those kind of organizations where he was just using serial killers as scapegoats through those whole rings of sex rings, and pedophilia.
Yeah, and that's why I tried as hard as I could to find a link between him and Walter Breen. Because then, if you could connect John D. Norman to the friends of Leonard Lake's neighbor, you know, it
good old Morning Glory and Otter.
Yeah, Morning Glory and Otter, or Tim, or Oberon.
Yep.
But yeah, they're all, and that's the thing, is that all these occult people have as many aliases as Leonard Lake. And you got to keep shotgun blasting the terms into YouTube. Like, you can't just look for Oberon Zell marijuana farm. You got to look for Tim Zell, Tim Gazelle, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. It's there. It's Leonard Lake's crime, which at first seems just like two crazy people beating people in a bunker and taping them. There's a rich tapestry there as large as the Manson case.
Yeah, I also believe that. I believe there's far more things behind the scenes, and there were far more possibly victims chosen.
Three-star enterprises.
Yeah.
Yeah. There always seems to be a stopping point, but for me as a researcher, like connecting Leonard Lake to the Society for Creative Anachronism and being able to prove it is something I haven't seen done in the work before.
No. I also can't recall
Right.
anything, so.
You've seen that picture, though, huh? I thought I saw it once, too.
Yeah, I really can recall it, but it is like 10 years ago. It was really in the early stages then when I was into this kind of subject matter.
The last forum I ever seriously was invested in that was dealing with it said that it had been scrubbed.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Evidently.
That puts Charlie at activities associated with Greenfield Ranch. And the SCA as well, this is another thing I didn't have time to research, is they keep their minutes. They're like a club. They keep a they keep a record of what they've done every time. So somewhere there should be a record of Leonard Lake attending some of these events and what position he held. And there's another mysterious thread to this, like, you know, I mentioned that one man early on, Gwydion. Gwydion Penderin bought into the Greenfield Ranch around 75. Well, he dies on, you know, the pagan holiday Samhain?
Nope.
It's like a witch's holiday. It might be the winter solstice. I'm not sure how they all work. But he dies on Samhain, and he's the first official bard of the Society for Creative Anachronism. So he's a guy who goes around and sings the history at every event they do. But he's held in very high esteem. And he dies in a car accident on one of these pagan nights. And the next bard, I couldn't find any evidence on him. So this is the bard from, like, I believe Penderin dies in 79, so this would be like 79 to 90, or the 80s. I can't find this person. But the next bard afterwards is killed. He's shot in the chest with a shotgun in his home. So I almost, in some of my more like out there speculation, would almost wonder if Leonard Lake maybe held that position and there was more to that job.
Yeah. That's a possibility, good possibility.
Well, it falls into that timeline. Is you get a very murky timeline with Leonard Lake, but there's certain things that can't happen neither here nor there. What do you make of the allegations of him trying to engage in Project Miranda before Wilseyville?
I can recall reading that he was preparing Operation Miranda before the Wilseyville area. I can't recall reading anything, so I don't know.
In Die For Me and I Evil, a lot of the Greenfield Ranch residents, like even Venus Salem, the woman I told you he bought his house from, mentioned that, what was I going to say? I just lost my train of thought completely, man. Where were we at there?
About the connection with the preparing of Operation Miranda before Wilseyville.
Oh, yeah, he talks to people about it basically as openly as he does about cyanide. That woman, Venus Salem, she's in die for me as a character, I guess. But he tells her about it, and she claims that she thought it was an environmentalist shelter. And that his neighbors, when he lives in Greenfield, get mad that he's using backhoe and things like that. So he had a bunker when he was living at Greenfield Ranch. And that's not speculative. Like, that's definitely there. Because there's a number of Greenfield Ranch residents who are concerned with Leonard building his bunker. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I didn't know that fact. So yeah, it is interesting. Like he was he was already busy. He was a busy man.
Yeah, I don't understand how there's a certain period from 1980s onwards where the cops can be called at any time, and this guy can go to jail. And he gets probation from stealing the construction materials while he's living on Greenfield Ranch. And he tells everyone that if I ever go back to jail, I'm taking the cyanide. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Well, he doesn't take the cyanide. he escapes from jail the first time. Well, he posts bail and then he escapes. Correct?
Yep.
So why didn't he take the cyanide? And why does he take it when he's caught for shoplifting? Why does he post bail when he's caught for firearms? That's the question I can't answer.
Yeah, there are just a lot of gaps in the whole story. If you really do your homework, you always come to different conclusions.
Well, the police officer's proximity to that shoplifting is very dubious. The fact that there is an officer literally on the block when they decide to steal something so trivial. I don't understand if it was a fluke by Charles Ng or not, and he just, because he's a kleptomaniac, tried to hide a vice under his jacket. But it still doesn't give any... I don't understand. I mean, I guess when they showed Leonard Lake that he had a silenced pistol in his car, maybe the jig was up.
Yeah, what do you make of McGowan's investigation that when after the shoplifting event, they went to the ranch and they found the snuff film studio, and there was also a character named Tom Eisenman, a former Navy man, present there, and he was specialized in sex crimes involving children, including snuff movies. So what a coincidence that they were only to the ranch for the shoplifting complaint, and there was also an individual present who was also heavily specialized in child pornography and snuff films.
Well, I believe that relates to the coroner they bring on the scene to dig up the bones, and he, within a very short time period, seems to assert that he knows what's going on there. And he's a very famous, I don't know if the correct term is coroner or crime scene investigator, but the man in charge with digging up those bones, first of all, he doesn't find all of them because they find Charles Gunner years later.
Yep.
But he's so sure of everything that's happened. He's like a celebrity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he had a family. I think Leonard Lake, I mean, my most off-the-cuff speculation, I think he had his own operation going down. In his own mind, he was the fourth prince, or Cricket was. One or the other.
Yeah, they were probably involved in something really kind of deep, some kind of real cult, yeah, some,
Right, with the same sort of similarities you see in the Dahmer case to some sort of intergenerational facilitation of this kind of behavior.
Yep.
Because you'd think at some point, if you and your wife, hypothetical wife, got divorced, and they left you the property, they left you in charge of it to rent it out, that they would wonder who was renting the property.
Yeah.
And if you, my fugitive ex-husband. So they're complicit in aiding and abetting a fugitive. So not only do they get immunity, not only does Cricket get blanket immunity, but her parents do as well. Because if I own a property and a fugitive is living there, as a property owner in the United States, I'm responsible. Especially if I know. So that's even a part you see described to fit the narrative within the case.
Yeah, well,
There are other people complicit of crimes, yet you never see it reported that way. Well, that's collusion.
yeah.
And with all these different narratives of Leonard Lake's life and even Charles Ng's life, is there's collusion on the narrative. I don't know how something like that would work. But like I said earlier, talking about Dan Lasseter's later statements on the book, the fact that he didn't think there was any sort of cult activity going on at Greenfield Ranch kind of makes me discount the rest of his work.
Yeah, he probably gave as many authors an official narrative that only substantiates the court official story and from law enforcement.
Well, that's a separate conspiracy that I have in the true crime world, is that when these crimes happen, there's a person given the responsibility of writing the book under the authority of the government.
Yeah, doing independent research, really independent, objective.
It's the only way.
Yeah, I agree.
Everything else is speculation. What do I believe in Leonard Lake? There's a lot of circumstantial evidence that points to MK Ultra, but I cannot find a single data point that can correspond with that. I can't find anything about Leonard Lake's drug abuse.
I hope through those.
He does seem experienced with drugs.
Yeah,
I mean, he lives in a community of New Age drug addicts, basically.
Yeah, I hope those Freedom of Information Acts can shed some light on the whole military career.
Right. I mean, I'm amazed that we're able, after this long, to gather evidence that the mainstream press didn't.
Yeah, most definitely.
And that gives me faith, carrying forward with this activity, that, we're not schizophrenics or something like that.
No, but we're over 2 hours now. Are there any last things that you want to add to?
No. Just try to make it sound good, and I hope you can use it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to upload the podcast, definitely. And I thank you very much for your revelations, also how you articulate it, and the whole presentation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's a lot of different connections, and it's hard to make it sound clear sometimes. I think we did an alright job.
I really think so.
Are there any other cases you're interested in?
Yeah, we'll correspond with the email. I will send some list and some other topics, because this is going to be definitely to be continued.
Excellent. Do you want me to send you all the different news clippings and stuff like that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Alright, it'll be a lot, but I'll get it to you by tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. Have a great day or evening, listeners and subscribers. I thank you.
Yeah, be safe.
Thank you, man. Likewise. Later.